It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all.
Al, we start with you this week, and I suspect that you've been called an elitist before, so that might not be a label that you're offended by. But that was the battle cry from the Biden campaign: is that talking heads like Fromm and Fuller are not in touch with the American people, and get off my case. I'm going to be the nominee.
Well, that's what President Biden has decided to do for the time being. Look, I don't think this issue is over. He can call me whatever he wants. I've been called a lot worse than elites in my career in the Democratic Party. But the reality is that he's facing. There are three or four realities that we have to face as we make this decision. I don't think this is over. I think yesterday Nancy Pelosi sort of hinting that he ought to reconsider. Getting the same vibes from Schumer. You know, they're very careful about how they do it, but it's clear that they are hearing from rank and file. And particularly senators up in swing states and House members in tough what they call frontline districts that are swing districts that Biden could very well cost them their seats. The concern I think with most of the Democratic Party right now is that we've made this argument, as I've made many times on Fromm and Fuller, that Trump is an existential threat to democracy. Democracy's on the line. And, some of us think it's really important that we have our strongest candidate to do that, to beat him. And the concern that we're getting is that he will not only lose, certainly if the election were today, but the other concern is it'll bring he'll lose the Senate, and we won't win back the House, and people are concerned about that. Naturally, going into the debate, Biden was running behind Trump. He's got about a 36-37% approval rating. That is, Craig can talk about that because he's been there, and I've been there with Jimmy Carter. He's been there with George H.W. Bush. It's hard to get reelected without a bad debate. With an approval rating that low. The reality is that in both 2020 and 2016, Biden won overwhelmingly in Massachusetts, California. In 2016, Hillary won. In 2020, Biden won overwhelmingly in Massachusetts, California, and New York. You take those three big Democratic strongholds away, and Trump wins a majority of the vote in the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So, he's going to get that vote, and it's really important because that vote, particularly in the swing states, I think there's a general conclusion among Democrats, has been for a while, that the three critical states for us are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those states have a lot of Trumpers in them. Trump runs better in those states, ran better both times than he did nationally. So he's going to get his vote. The second thing that is a reality is that to win, Biden or whoever replaces him, if he gets replaced, has to win all of the anti-Trump vote, and they have to come out to vote. They can't sit home and just not vote for Trump. They can't waste their vote on the third party. If Biden or the Democratic candidate doesn't get all of the anti-Trump vote, I'm talking 99, 98%, Trump will win because of his strength in those Midwestern so-called blue wall states that will decide the Electoral College.
Yeah.
The third thing that is important to recognize is there's a poll out again this morning, Washington Post, 67% of Americans and 56% of Democrats thought Biden was too old to be president. So Biden's situation, he's got a big press conference after NATO today, after the NATO meetings today. He's going to try to show that that really was just an off night. But Biden's problem is that his biggest liability is not going to get better. He's not going to get younger. The chances of him, having another off night, you got to assume are pretty realistic, are pretty good. So that's why I think there's a push in the House and the Senate to at least have him reconsider. So I don't think this deal's over. I just make one final point. I heard this morning on Morning Joe going yappity about, unity in the Democratic Party and how House divided and all that. The challenge for the Democrats isn't to be worried about unity in the second week of July. The challenge for the Democrats is to get the best damn candidate we can get. Because we'll unify. We have an automatic unifier in the general election. It's called Donald John Trump. We will unify. But the danger is that if we worry about feelings and unity in the second week of July, instead of making a hard-nosed decision of who the best person is to beat Trump, we will see plenty of disunity on Election Day.
Craig, I'd also like to get another elite point of view, if you don't mind.
I've thought a lot about it, and I don't disagree with Al's sort of assessment of the political side of this at all. But I wanted to talk about it from more of a personal, individual standpoint. And you know that I do this newsletter called Decade 7, the premise being that I've been on the planet over 70 years, and there must be some experience there that is, could be helpful. And in this case, and I'm sure like many others, I've had experience with people that are experiencing cognitive decline. And there's some things you learn. First of all, when they do these assessments, which I do believe the president should have, Trump should have, you find out that there's actually several different cognitive activities or functions, and they don't all decline at the same rate. They don't get better, but they don't decline at the same rate. And so some people have memory issues. Just can't remember names. They can't remember where they put their key. Other people have recognition issues. They ask them in this assessment to draw the face of a clock and put in the hands to show 4 o'clock. Some people who function fine cannot do that. They literally cannot figure out how to draw a clock so it's 4 o'clock. Other people can't analyze and reason. And I say that because there's really no question that there's been cognitive decline with Joe Biden. And it's, to me, this is a little harsh, but it verges on, at best, unkind, and at worst, just irresponsible, for people to think he is going to figure out on his own what's the best thing to do, because I think we're past that. And another experience many people have had is the act of taking the keys away from somebody who can no longer drive safely. Maybe they can drive the car, but they get lost, or maybe they drive on the wrong lane, and when those keys are taken away, almost universally, that person protests, gets angry, declares they can drive just fine. They insist upon continuing to drive. And I've known families who not only take the keys away, they take the car away, they put it someplace else, because the person has the inability to make a judgment that maybe 5 years ago they could have made. The last story, the last little case study I have is somebody that I knew really well. I was on an advisory board with him. He was in the aviation world. The man was brilliant. He was engaging, enjoyable, and all was going fine And one day he got on an airplane, flew to a major European city to go to a conference. When he got there, he did not know where he was, nor did he know why he was there. And so when I say it's irresponsible, I really think that this can't go on this way. You can't run a presidential campaign where every event is another test. Well, he's going to prove it at 5:30 tonight, and then this weekend he's going to do an interview with a national network. And each one of these is like pass fail. And you can't run that way. Plus, as we've said before, one of the things Biden really has to do and the campaign has to do, is communicate that their accomplishments and that they're ready to address issues that affect people across the country. So you can't go into all these things defending your cognitive ability. And honestly, I have a lot of respect for Joe Biden. I mean, almost 5 decades of public service. Whether you agree or disagree with him, I think he's always had the nation's interest at heart. And yet, you can't just say, well, it's his decision to make, because I think past that. And I think people have to go to him who respect him, but who are leaders in the party, and say, Joe, it's time to take the keys away.
Al, let's just say hypothetically that all this wishful thinking turns out to be a reality, and Joe Biden goes on television next week and says that he is going to step down, and he is now going to support Vice President Harris for the nomination. Does that change anything in terms of the Democratic anxiety for 2024?
Well, first of all, in American democracy, there's no such thing as anointing your successor. We don't have you can't just, the president can endorse and we'll see what happens. I think it changes a lot, actually, because the biggest liability for the Democrats right now, or for Biden, is his age. And if nothing else, and I think his age, what Craig described in the cognitive decline, those two things put a ceiling on his vote. And the point I made before, that Democrats have to get all of the anti-Trump vote, Biden will have a harder time doing that. I mean, think about this. He won last time. At this point, he was 4 points up in the polls, 9 points up in the polls. And now he's 3 points down, and he does worse in the states he needs to win, the swing states, than he does overall. So that's a 12-point difference. He won by 4. So, chances are, and even though he won by 7 million votes, more than 7 million votes, and more than 4 points, because of the way the Electoral College works, he was within 44,000 votes of losing the election, because the 3 states that decided it, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, were all within 0.5%. I just can't believe, with this kind of decline in his overall status, that the chances wouldn't be overwhelming that he will lose more than 44,000 people who voted for him last time, either third party, not vote, whatever it is, in those states, and probably other swing states as well. So that particular burden will be removed. I personally believe that if he decides to get out, and the reason it is his decision is because he's won the nomination. Now, he maybe have to be persuaded, he may have to be browbeaten by the leadership, but if he says, I'm staying in, then the only thing that could happen is delegates say, well, in good conscience, I can't vote for him. I suspect that is not a big chance of happening. So he will be the nominee if he doesn't basically voluntarily, maybe with a push, get out. But the way I would see it is sort of the way James Carville suggested. I think the DNC or the Democratic governors or some organization, I know if DLC were still around, we'd do it, would host a bunch of forums and invite all the candidates. And you can do it over 6 weeks. It's not impossible. And then you go to the convention and you vote. He can make the argument that Vice President Harris is most prepared, and she certainly would be particularly if she had the president's or whether she has the president's endorsement or not, she would be probably going in as the front runner. But, the other liability that the Biden-Harris ticket has is that 37% of the Americans approve of them. And, so she would carry more of that burden than, say, a Governor Whitmer or Governor Newsom or Governor Beshear or Roy Cooper or Pritzker or Josh Shapiro or Wes Moore or any of the other governors that might get in the race. So would the Democratic Party be better off? Well, if you know you're going to lose with Biden, it's hard not to be better off with somebody else, even if it's the great unknown.
Yep.
And of course, that's the big problem. People get scared because the ones that, every time we'd get our head bashed in because we tried to change the Democratic Party or push policy that most Democrats didn't agree with. Clinton would just say to me, "You just got to remember, change is never easy."
Yeah. Fred, you have the last word this week.
So I like the question that you ask, Al, but I want to modify it because I'm sort of in the same place. I don't think we should depend upon, and maybe it's not appropriate, but President Biden naming a successor by himself. But I do think that, in my humble opinion, what the Democratic Party needs is to rally around someone as fast as they can to catch up to and pass Donald Trump. And in my mind, the same group of people, include George Clooney, by the way, who seems to have had more impact faster than anybody, but between Democratic leaders and the donor community, if they were to first have Biden be willing to step away, and then with Biden, announce that they are throwing their support behind Kamala Harris, I think that would electrify the election process. Now, I know we have viewers, I'm sure I'm going to hear from some, who don't like her as an alternative, but I would ask them, well, do you know the other alternatives? Because while one option is certainly the one Al points out, it takes time. There's a vetting process, and Al and I have been through this. Kamala Harris has been vetted as a statewide, candidate in California, as a national candidate for vice president. We know what we know. There are not surprises there. But if somebody does well in one of these debates and suddenly they soar to the top of the list, but then there's an issue, then you're so close to the convention, what do you do about it? So if I was to give advice, which I'm not going to seek my advice, I would say it's a two-part process that has to happen. People have to convince the president it's time to step away, and then they have to get behind an individual, rally the party behind them, and go into the convention unified, at which point the people, as Al points out quite rightly, the people that have been are there as delegates would be forced would not vote for the person for whom they were elected to vote Joe Biden, but for the person that the party's rallying for. It may be that some who are of the governors mentioned feel they have a complete right to challenge an individual, and that's certainly their right. But I don't know that they have the time or the money or the national recognition to be successful.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.